Hello, everybody. Hello, Narman Malim. Today, I'll talk to you about Azerbaijani enlightenment. But before I begin, I would like to tell you about the enlightenment and its ideology. So, I want to start my speech with Immanuel Kant's thoughts. He said that the public use of man's reason must always be free, and it alone can bring about enlightenment among men. This means that a person must be free in the environment, and this freedom will lead to the enlightenment from the environment. Now I want to tell you about history of development of oil industry in Azerbaijan. Thus, the Azerbaijani oil industry consists of five stages. More clearly, the historical homeland of oil is Azerbaijan. The first stage, since the Middle Ages, Arab historians, geographers, and travelers have said that in the 9th century, Ahmad al-Balruri, Absheron was an ancient place associated with oil. Later, this sentence was said in different centuries. In the 11th, 10th centuries, Abu Ishaq Istakari in the 10th century, Istakari in the 10th century, Abu Hassan Ali Masudi, and several others. But it was the first time in Azerbaijan, not only in Azerbaijan, but also in the world. In 1846, it was drilled from a well in the Bibi Heibat oil field. The depth of the well was 21 meters. At the same time, the development of the oil industry began. Then, at the end of the 19th century, there were already 167 entrepreneurs operating in the oil industry, 49 of whom were Azerbaijanis. Hacı Zeynalabdin Tağıyev, Murtuz Mukhtarov, Issa Behajinski, and others are known as oil billionaires. These people played an important role in the development of the oil industry. In addition, I would like to note that in 1876, the Noble brothers established a company for oil production and refining in Baku. At the time, the Noble brothers also owned tankers, barges, hotels, and etc. in the Caspian Sea. The second stage began in the 1920 with nationalization of the Azerbaijani oil industry. I want to say that in 1921, oil production decreased to 2.4 million tons, and new oil fields are being explored in Azerbaijan under the guise of exploration work. And the identified areas in Gala, Buzovna, and other places are being put into operation. Then comes to the third stage, which began in 1950 to the 1969. Offshore geological exploration work was expanded. A number of oil and gas fields were discovered and put into operation. The fourth stage is the fourth stage is characterized by the high dynamic development of the oil and gas industry of Azerbaijan, as well as all sectors of the economy since 1969, and this overlaps with the first period of the leadership of our national leader Heydar Aliyev in Azerbaijan. Until now, the technical equipment used in the Caspian Sea allowed working only in the areas with a depth of up to the 40 meters. At the time, almost all oil and gas fields were discovered in the Azerbaijani sector of the Caspian Sea at the depths of up to the 40 meters. The increase in offshore oil and gas production was due to the oil and gas fields lying at greater depths. As a result of Heydar Aliyev's initiative and efforts, more than 400 crowns, people-lying vessels, and etc. of 75 types were brought to Azerbaijan in the 70s and 80s. And finally, I would like to note that the most characteristic part of the fourth stage is the construction of deep sea base planned in Astrakhan, which is the result of the strong will and courage of Heydar Aliyev. And the last fifth stage is characterized new oil strategy, covering the collapse of the collapse of the USSR, the period of independence, and the new history of Azerbaijan. On September 20, 1994, the state of oil company of Azerbaijan, SOCAR, and a group of foreign oil companies, Azerbaijan International Operating Company, AIOC, signed the production sharing agreement entitled a contract of the century, covering 1994-2024. Thus, the new oil strategy of the Azerbaijani state was formalized. After the signing of the contract of the century, the route of oil to be produced under the contract to Western markets became relevant. Became relevant. Actually, that's me at the end of my speech. So. Now I will now hand over to my teammate. Thank you for listening.
Hello everybody, today I'm going to talk about the progress and women's rights in the beginning of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, the national press of Azerbaijan, which was in the years of revival, became one of the powerful means of influencing various spheres of public life in all periods of its existence. Our national press has included in its programs such as an important and very difficult task as involvement of women life in public life. Fanatic habits, hardship, illiteracy, living in isolation from public life, lack of confidence in women's freedom in society, the exclusion of this group from social life created a number of difficulties for their personal lives, and press took important steps to raise these issues. Leading the representatives of Azerbaijan try to influence people opinion by educating the people, explaining to them their rights and responsibilities. Journalists and publics say that unless a woman is free as person, her problems will remain unsolvable. They put forward the idea. For example, Hasan Bey Zardabi, Shah Dağlı, Mehmet Quluzadə, Mirzə Əkbər Sabir, Mehmet Əmin Rəsulzadə, Ordubadi, Ömer Faiq Nemanzadə wrote on these topics. And the main newspapers and journals which also talk about these women issues are the Şərq Hayat, Sada, İffət, Açıq Söz, Zambo, and etc. etc. Newspapers and magazines focused on three key issues: education, marriage, and social issues, with more coverage of the abolition of hijab. At the beginning of the 20th century, the issue of freedom of Azerbaijan women was first time raised in the Shargurus newspaper, which was published 13th March in Tbilisi. Its founder, a prominent representative of the Azerbaijan Enlightenment, Mehmet Ağa Shahdaglı, wrote and published articles on women's freedom in the Muslim world. His writings on this subject were mainly devoted to the problems that restrict women's freedom and gradually alienate them from world and public um, life. The issue of upbringing of wives is literally a matter of death or survival for the sake of the Turks' imprisonment. He said, Mehmet Ağa Şahdağlı tried to make the topic of the day the issue of women's freedom by calling on the people of Baku to take action, to write their thoughts and ideas in Shargurus. The first woman signature in the history of the Azerbaijan national press also appeared in the page of Shargurus. Women also spoke in this newspaper under the signatures Bir Hanım, Gəncəli Bir Hanım, Bakılı Bir Hanım. Molla Nasreddin was one of the magazines that took a different approach to the women's rights. He satirically criticized and expressed these problems. Starting from the first issue, Molla Nasreddin covers the topic of women uh, from the new methods and means brought to satirical journalism: questions, answers, proverbs, dictionaries, riddles, and etc. The magazines raised the issue of the need to involve all women in education, and in satirical articles entitled hijab and Daldan Atılan Taş Topuğa Değer spoke about the problems that shortcoming in the area create for their happiness. Time has shown that the efforts of our prominent intellectuals have not been in vain. Azerbaijan women began to appear in public and political life. They even managed to create a purely women's newspapers issue, which brought their major problem to public attention by women themselves. This is one of the signs in the early 20th century. Azerbaijan women have become a serious social. Here and in the page of the other media outlets, the intensification of the speechless of women authors, the speech of women authors, the more confident expression of their position in the exchange of wives' views with authors of different position, and so on, showed once again that difficult struggle of the Azerbaijan press for women's freedom in the early 20th century was not in vain. On the contrary, it was became a factor in supporting the emergence of strengthening of progressive position and tendencies on women issues in various circles of society.
Hello everyone, today I'm gonna talk about the first newspaper in Azerbaijan, which is Akinci. The Azerbaijani press at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, contrary to expectations, revealed that the first our intellectuals of that period possessed sufficient information on America and about generally West and commented extensively on the events that happened during that period. The Azerbaijani intelligentsia was aimed to educate people in order to create a national identity, a very fruitful mission. For this purpose, the first newspapers, journals, magazines soon appeared, and they played crucial role in the circulating progressive ideas. The national intelligentsia wasn't only fighting against the Tsarist regime, but also fighting against religious backwardness. Akinci, in 1875, the first newspaper of the Azerbaijani press and its successors, Shergruz 1904, Fuyuzat 1906, and Azerbaijan 1918. Establishing a national press. In those days, Baku's rapid development as the central city of Azerbaijan brought up the questions of establishing a national press in mother tongue. Hassan Bey understood that there was a great need in the newspaper or national press in Azerbaijani language. He applied to the government for permission in order to create a national press in Azerbaijan. After much hard work, the great thinker succeeded the publishing in Azerbaijani language and Akinci in Azerbaijani at the Baku Governor's Printing House on 22 July 1875. This beginning led to the foundations of national press. The Akinci newspaper was published from 22 July 1875 to 29 September 1877, twice a month, editions of 300 to 400 copies. This newspaper wasn't accessible for the peasants who were the majority and boycotted it because of its content. As Savitsovitsky say that Akinci become a form of intelligentsia. However, Akinci's editor Hasan Bey Zardabi's restless fight for education for women continued and concluded in the opening of very first school for girls in Baku in 1901. It's a fact that the origins of Azerbaijani press coincide with the development of public and national consciousness. The reason is that the section of national press create this consequence and its substructure. The process of national spiritual awakening began within the people's empire. The meaning of Akinci. The reason why the newspaper was called Akinci was due to some political and social reasons. Akinci, which means Polakman, was chosen in order to not to show that the newspaper didn't have any political agenda. On the other hand, Zardabi's purpose was to reach the majority of society. His aim was to educate those who didn't have any opportunity or access to study. Akinci was successful in addressing its audience and creating unifying spirit. The fact that the printing machine, which was used to print the Akinci newspaper, was bought by Zardabi with his own money in Istanbul. As you can see, the Azerbaijani press has gone through the following phases. The language and style of the Azerbaijani press began with the Akinci. Now, when reading the old editions of newspapers, you cannot but be amazed by Hasan Bey Zardabi's language, like Mindat people. They wrote simply in clear and pure language, which is accessible for broad section of population. From 5 July 1991, the day when Azerbaijani's first printed organ, Akinci newspaper was first published, July 22, is marked as professional holiday for the country's journalists. And thank you for listening. And now my group mates will continue to the presentation.
Hello, in this subtopic I will talk about Mirza Fatah Akhundzadeh, the founder of modern Azerbaijani literature and the first atheist writer and philosopher in Azerbaijan. Akhundzadeh was born in 1812 in Nuha, present day we call Shaki. He was ethnically an Azerbaijani. His parents and especially his uncle Haji Alaskar, who was a fatalist first teacher, prepared young Fatali for a career in Shia's clergy. But the young man was attracted to the literature. In 1832, while in Ganzak, Akhundzadeh came into contact with the poet Mirza Shafi Vaze, who introduced him to Western secular South and discouraged him from pursuing a religious career. Later in 1834, Akhundzadeh moved to Tiflis and spent the rest of his life working as a translator at Oriental language in the service of the Russian Empire's viceroyalty. Akhundzadeh's sharp pen was directed against everything that he believed in hindered the advance of the Russian Empire, which for Akhundzadeh was a force for modernization in spite of the atrocities it committed in its southern advance against Akhundzadeh's own king. Also well ahead of his time, Akhundzadeh was a keen advocate for alphabet reform, recognizing deficiencies of Persian Arabic script with regards to Turkish sounds. He began his work regarding alphabet reform in 1850. Later, he openly advocated the change from Persian Arabic to a modified Latin alphabet. These projects, which kept busy until the last years of his life, didn't receive support from anywhere, especially the Ottoman Empire, but later the Latin script, which was used in Azerbaijan between 1922 and 1939, and the Latin script which is used now were based on Akhundzadeh's third version. And in the end, I want to say that Akhundzadeh was a patriotic person who always wanted to do new things for the development of his state and nation. He said, a true man of high morals and kindness can only be considered a man who combines all his actions and behavior with true patriotism. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Now I am gonna talk about Hasan Bey Zardabi, who played a key role in the enlightenment of Azerbaijan. Hasan Bey Salim Bey oğlu Melikov was born in Zardab in 1837. He was one of the first Muslims in the Russian Empire to graduate from Moscow University in 1865. Also, he had established a benevolent society to help Muslim children to receive modern education at Rassa Muslim schools. Also, throughout his life, Zardabi fought for the enlightenment of Muslims in the Caucasus. In 1873, Zardabi, with activities Nazarbay Vazirov, staged the first Azerbaijani theatrical production based on the play by Mirza Fatali Akhundov, which is The Adventure of a Miser. Also, in 1875, he founded Akinci, the first independent newspaper in Azerbaijani language in the Russian Empire. Moreover, after the closure of Akinci in 1877, Zardabi was exiled to his native village. Furthermore, in 1901, Baku was one of the only places in the Caucasus for Muslim girls who wanted to study. Therefore, Zardabi can also be considered as the first Azerbaijani who not only for women's rights to education but also political rights and independence for women. Also, in his articles, he called the creation of a single Turkish language in the Russian Empire that would ensure the cultural unification of Muslims and the progression and social development of Muslims. Thank you for listening. Now I give the floor to my group mate to conclude our presentation.
Hello. Arab historians, geographers, and explorers have claimed since the Middle Ages that Absheron was an old location related to the oil in the 9th century. Oil was drilled for the first time in the world in 1846 from a well in the Bibiheybad oil field. At the same time, the oil industry began to grow. The nationalization of Azerbaijan's oil sector began the second stage in 1920. The third stage, which began in 1950, follows. Since 1969, Azerbaijan's oil and gas industry, as well as all other areas of economy, have, have seen rapid growth. The last stage is marked by the formation of a new oil strategy, which encompasses the fall of the Soviet Union, the time of independence, and Azerbaijan's new history. As a result, Azerbaijan's new oil policy became official. Women's education, marriage, and social concerns were highlighted in newspapers and publications, with the elimination of the hijab receiving increasing emphasis. The topic of Azerbaijani women's freedom was first discussed on March 13, 1903, in Tbilisi Sharghi Rus newspaper. Maulana Nasreddin has been covering the topic of women since the first issue, using novel methods and tools. Our eminent minds' achievements have not gone unnoticed over time. Hassan Bey realized that a newspaper in the native tongue was desperately needed. The first national newspaper, Akinci, was launched in 1875 and was one of the key products of the Enlightenment movement. The groundwork for a national press was laid at this point. The emergence of the Azerbaijani press parallels the growth of public and national consciousness. Hassan Bey Zardabi struggled for the enlightenment of Muslims in Caucasus throughout his life. In his works, he advocated for the formation of a unified Turkish language in Russia, which will assure Muslims' cultural unity as well as their advancement and social development. That's so. We hope you enjoyed our presentation. Thank you for listening.